Hello, good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining this very early session, wherever you are in the world. And I welcome you to this panel discussion that will be tackling the question of gender intentionality in implementing inclusive and instant payment systems in Africa. My name is Jenna Kane, and I am the lead on advocacy and partnerships at Africanenda. Today, I have the honor and privilege to introduce two very knowledgeable experts on the topic. So, first panelist, Ms. Jacqueline Juma from Africanenda, as she's the leading director on advocacy and capacity development. Welcome, Jacqueline. And our second panelist, His Excellency Ibrahim Gimba Seydou, former minister to the former president of Nigeria and officer of G16 IIPS LLC. Thank you both for joining this panel, and we look forward to hearing and just to set the scene a bit in terms of the conversation as it relates to gender intentionality in implementing inclusive and instant payment systems in Africa. Why do we speak of that, and why is it so relevant to the Financial Inclusion Week? When we speak of financial inclusion is a very broad topic. It could speak to account ownership. It can speak to access to digital financial services. It could speak to access to lending, credit, and different financial services that are not available to all segments of the population on the continent. And so today we decided that we're going to focus specifically on inclusive and instant payment systems in Africa, and having women specifically for this topic access these services in Africa. So just to give you a little background on the topic and where we're coming from when we speak of gender intentionality, what are the main reasons that women are excluded in Africa and don't have access to these IIPS systems? So there's a lot of research that's been done on this topic, and reasons range from formal lack of ID, financial illiteracy, the enabling policy and regulatory frameworks are not adapt to the innovative solutions that are put forward on the continent, and also lack of mobile phone ownership and account ownership. Just to give you a little bit of data, when we compare Africa to developing countries, we see that there's a difference in terms of progress. In developing countries, we've seen an increase in account ownership going from 6% to 9% in 2021. However, when we look at the same numbers in Africa, we see in sub-Saharan Africa, we see an increase. So it's gone from 7%. There's been an increase by 7% since 2011 in terms of the account ownership, lack of account ownership. So looking at these numbers, what can we do to address women having access to these IIPS systems, and what tools are needed, what policies are needed, and what innovative solutions are needed to address these gaps? And so we've read a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of research in this matter, and there was one report that came out a few years ago from Caribou Digital, and they looked into the key L1P principles, which are payment system principles in building inclusive and instant payment systems for women. And some of the key functionalities that came out of that report that help women to access IIPS in Africa include, amongst other things, having solutions that are interoperable. Women would like to have options to transfer from one solution to another solution, or to be able to swap, providers. Also, women are price sensitive, and so the lower the cost, the more likely that they will use these services. And then finally, another key component that came out of this report is that these providers need to look into options of tiered know your client criterias. Why we say that? For instance, I said earlier, sometimes there's issues of lack of formal identification, or maybe they don't have account ownerships or mobile money. So if we have tiered KYCs, it will give more opportunities for women to participate in being included in these IIPS systems. So having just said all of that, I just want to start with Ms. Juma and hear a little bit her thoughts on what Africanenda has been doing in terms of accelerating inclusive and instant payment systems, and specifically what they're doing as it relates to gender intentionality and implementing payment solutions. As the lead of the gender intentionality and implementing IIPS, we are working on a report that will be upcoming hopefully early next year. So Jacqueline, I just want you to take this time to, see your thoughts and your vision as to where we can go in looking further into gender intentionality and implementing payment systems. Thank you. Okay, I think there might be some technical difficulties as I see that her screen is frozen. I'll take on this question. As I said earlier, I'm leading on the gender intentionality in implementing inclusive and instant payment systems in Africa. And as I said earlier, we're looking into going further into this question from the starting point of the Caribou Digital report on the topic. And so having said that, we're as Africanenda in general, let me start by that. Our mandate is to accelerate inclusive and instant payment systems in Africa. And we work with different central banks across the continent, as well as development partners, international organizations, fintech, private sector associations, and regional economic communities. And the mandate is to reach the SDG goals by 2030 of reducing the gap of financial inclusion on the continent. And so in that task, we specifically focus on digital public infrastructure. And so when we speak of digital public infrastructure, we speak of the payment systems that are put in place to include all segments of the population in these payment schemes. And so we speak to women, we speak to rural communities, we speak to low income people. So really the idea is to have to reduce the gap of financially excluded people on the continent of Africa. And as it relates to gender intentionality, in implementing IIPS, we have different challenges, as I stated earlier in the conversation. And with those different challenges, we plan to look into two different areas: the demand side and the supply side. So when we speak of the demand side, what do the women want? What do they need? What is available to them as we speak right now? And then when we speak to the supply side, what is being offered to them? What can we build to make sure that these solutions are made available to them at whenever when needed, and they address their needs, their specific needs. And so when preliminary research that we've done on that, one thing that always comes up is that data is not available. Data is not available to understand the behavior of women and what they need in terms of solutions as it relates to payment systems. And so what has been put forward, and we've seen in certain countries, such as, I'll use the example of Rwanda, as they're upgrading their payment system platform. And what is being done in Rwanda is putting in place a monitoring and evaluation criteria that tracks the data and the usage of these payment systems of women. And what that does is that it allows us to understand the behavior. It allows us to get credible data on how women are using these tools. It allows us to build innovative solutions that will be specifically catered to the needs of women. So this is something that is not negligible and that is very important. And in our advocacy, we do insist a lot on sharing of data. A lot of these websites or a lot of these providers and stakeholders don't make these data necessarily public and made available to everyone that are looking into this question. And so what we try to do as well at Africanenda is that every year we have a flagship report called the State of Inclusive and Instant Payment Systems in Africa. The first version came out last year in 2022, and we're launching the second report in 2023, tracking the progress that has been made in the last few years as it relates to inclusive and instant payment systems in Africa. So that's one of our offerings and one of our one of the tools that we're providing to the public to address this question of financial inclusion and access to IIPS on the continent. Another thing recently, we've been working closely with development partners, as I said. And to give you an example, we've been working with the African Union Commission specifically, and we're looking to tap into the question of policy and regulatory frameworks as it relates to having women have access to inclusive and instant payment systems on the continent. And in our efforts to do advocacy on this important question, we are working directly with the Directorate of Gender and Youth of the African Union Commission. Within the initiative of the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission's initiative, the African Union Commission initiative, which is called Wi-Fi, Women and Youth Economic Initiative, Financial Inclusion Initiative. And the objective of that Wi-Fi platform is to advocate with the 55 member states of the continent to further push the agenda of financial inclusion and have women and youth fully included within the framework of Agenda 2063. And so this gives you a little bit of a peer view of what we're doing at Africanenda to push and to address this very timely question of women's inclusion in the financial ecosystem on the continent. I do see that my colleague Jacqueline is able to connect back. Jacqueline, are you here?
Hello. Hi, Jainaba. Hi, everyone. Very sorry. I've had to connect via phone. I hope it's okay. So I'll keep my camera off for now.
Okay.
So bandwidth, yes.
Thank you for joining. So I just gave a peer view of what we're doing at Africanenda, our mandate, and what we're doing as it relates to policy and regulatory frameworks with the Women and Youth Directorate of the African Union Commission, and as well as the upcoming report that's coming on gender intentionality and the SIPS report. I just want to give you an opportunity to provide any insights that you have as it relates to how you see the vision of the work that we're doing with Wi-Fi on gender intentionality in implementing IIPS. And also if you could speak a little bit more as to the functionalities of what IIPS represents in Africa and why it's so important to have gender intentionality in implementing IIPS in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Jainaba. To the question of IIPS and why it's important, first of all, connecting all Africans to the digital economy lowers the cost of financial transactions. It enables the way they interact with financial instruments, channels, etc. It also creates significant benefits for all, include from households to businesses and governments, and fuels the economic growth. Inclusive instant payment systems, therefore, are really critical in creating a more deeper access to financial services for the excluded people. However, at the moment, they require support to accelerate, and to scale, because there are competing interests that are currently impeding the standardization and accessibility of interoperable instant payment systems in Africa. So many challenges, and in terms of getting them to where they're supposed to be. So Africanenda's work to address these challenges involves, and I'm not sure you've gone through this, it involves reducing the gaps in project visioning, strategy, and implementation, and at the same time, providing or improving greater institutional capacity in the deployment of these instant payment systems. And maybe just to set the record, and maybe just talk a bit about what we mean by inclusive instant payment systems. We define instant payment systems as retail payment systems that are multilateral, open loop, enable digital push payments, real time for use 24 hours a day, or as close to that as possible. Of course, considering the variability that, in what we mean by real time. And this ranges from seconds to just under a day, depending on the jurisdiction. And for these payment systems to become inclusive, we look at several additional attributes. These include schemes that have licensed financial service providers having fair access to the schemes, as well as the participants having equal input opportunities into the schemes. Additional attributes include the central banks having a role in scheme governance, as well as the end users having a range of use cases and channels. And another attribute that also, enables the instant payment systems to check the inclusivity box are, they're supposed to be fit for purpose request mechanisms that are associated with the payment systems, for the sake of consumer protection, of course. In terms of our work and anticipating the project as regards gender intentionality, first of all, we acknowledge the growth, like you earlier mentioned, in terms of where we have come from, having, increasing number of accounts at 55% in 2021 as compared to 23% in sub-Saharan Africa. And we also acknowledge the gender gap that exists, which has, like you mentioned, increased to 12% in 2021. Now, this gives rise to several questions. We want to support the ecosystem to ensure that everybody moves beyond account holdership. And at the same time, everybody gets an account, and everybody also moves beyond holding an account. So in terms of account ownership, we have had several research pieces providing insights into the different types of challenges, as you mentioned, from policy and regulatory barriers, supply side barriers like inappropriate products, and also demand side barriers like behavioral barriers, or even just to some extent in some jurisdictions, women don't even have the devices or access to devices, or even for them to interact with some products, they need collateral. I think that is well known in terms of the what to enable them have accounts. The second thing is to also look at what are the differences in the way women and men interact with these digital financial services in Africa. And again, when you look at research, For example, the research the research on digital, the research on understanding the challenges and harnessing opportunities in the difference between men and women, you'd realize that it is said that there's a difference in the types of products and services that women and men interact with. Where men, for instance, are more likely to use DFS than women, women are also more likely to use informal services, suggesting that informal alternatives continue to provide more value to them. The data is also showing that mobile money is used more frequently by men than women in sending money, particularly, as well as in other basic provisions like airtime purchases. And we are also getting to understand that women are net receivers in terms of the transfers that happen. So if there's a difference, and that's how we come in, if there's a difference in the way they interact in the products and services, then it means we need to apply a gender lens in the way that we are extending these solutions or these services. An account is not just an account from a man and a woman's perspective. So as African Lender, we sought to appreciate what it would take, to understand from a payment system perspective, whether there are levers that we can nudge or whether there's something that we can touch that will actually influence the way women interact with digital financial services. So the research, of course, there's been pieces of research, like you mentioned, by Karibu Digital and others, to try and highlight what it would mean to consider L1P principles, and perhaps these L1P principles would unlock better opportunities for women. And our research as African Lender is going to build on this research because we believe some of these attributes, that is the level 1 principles, these are just proper attributes, can perhaps, at this point, we're hypothesizing, that once we apply this, there's going to be a difference. I can give a few of the principles that we want to further investigate. Number one, whether whether applied on the payment system level, they're going to influence the adoption of digital financial services by women. And secondly, to what extent, so that we can see how to work with the stakeholders, whether policymakers or IIPS participants, to consider applying these principles to drive the inclusivity of the instant payment systems as regards gender, and also reduce the gender gap. So, for instance, some of these principles, like for instance, the principle of interoperability, it is now emerging that this will be especially beneficial for women because it will lead to more convenience as well as new kinds of more specialized DFS products and services that meet specific needs. Perhaps there's an ask from the women's perspective in terms of the interoperability, in the flexibility. For instance, just to give an example, is interacting with, for instance, if you're sending money across networks, because again, I remember from the research that we did last year with the COMESA, when we were investigating some of the small traders, the challenges that they had. Some of the women were mentioning that, look, I'm forced to hold different wallets by different providers. If I have the flexibility to just wire or receive money across these players, then I'll be good in terms of accepting payments from my customers and at the same time, paying to suppliers. So there could be something in there in terms of interoperability and expanding the ability of women in interacting with this DFS. Maybe just to mention also something else is in terms of another principle in terms of the tiered KYC. Research is unveiling that women are much more likely to have limited forms of ID, and therefore they may benefit significantly from the availability of accounts with lower KYC requirements. Yeah, in many households, there are challenges with women, and especially rural households, women having some form of ID. In markets where the foundational ID has not been, I mean, in markets that are in the journey to getting foundational IDs. And so perhaps tweaking the way these accounts are available to women, from the sense of maybe tiering the expectations of the KYC requirements, might nudge them to use them with a basic most of means of identifying themselves, as well as the other element around costs. Where, in as much as costs, low cost would benefit both men and women. Women in many of these studies that I've mentioned appear to be more price sensitive. So there could be an element there in terms of finding the right approaches to apply the right pricing for different products and services that women would be interacting with. So I think, in a nutshell, this study, we are going to build on some of these principles to just understand how the applicability in terms of payment systems, instant payment systems, and at the same time, the extent to which they may help all of us to support women in the way they interact with digital financial services. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, for your for deep diving into the principles that were set out as it relates to interoperability, pricing, as well as tiered KYC. And also, we as African Nenda hope to be able to build on the different reports that are out there to provide solutions and our answers, or our humble proposal to address this very important question. So now I want to give the floor to our next panelist, His Excellency Ibrahima Gimba Seydou. Ibrahima Gimba Seydou has a lot of experience in working in Niger, his home country, as it relates to financial inclusion, and specifically focusing on smart villages. We hear a lot about smart cities, such as I said earlier, Kigali, Dakar, Nairobi. But there is a movement now where there's a shift, or at least trying to, in addition to focusing on smart cities, also speaking to smart villages, meaning areas that are considered rural outside of the big cities, and having these tools made available to people in those areas of the countries in Africa. So Ibrahim, I just want to hear more. We want to hear more about your experience in Niger, in the rural areas, as it relates to financial inclusion, getting women the necessary tools to have access to mobile money, to have access, to financial inclusion tools, payment system tools, and finding out where you think focus should be when we speak of women in these rural areas, as well as the different players and stakeholders that are helping in address this a very important topic. Over to you, Ibrahima. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tianaba. Thank you. Good morning to all, or good evening from wherever you are. It's a pleasure, actually, and even an honor to be able to share some perspectives on this very important topic and question. You mentioned smart village. The way you need to look at it is, let's say, the other side of the coin. Smart cities being one, those smart villages will kind of balance things out. And the reason we decided to focus on this topic or in this particular area was really we're aiming at doing through inclusion. when you look at it, I mean, what's the point of focusing inclusion just on a small part of the population? So in Niger, basically, we look at the whole, let's say, the question from different angle to try to have a 360 approach in addressing it. And what actually, let's say, Niger is just a sample of really what we can do almost everywhere, not only in Africa, but even worldwide. We focus on tech for dev, on the SDGs. And when you look at it, I mean, the SDGs really were addressing those disparities, we're addressing those inequalities, not only from the gender perspective, but really from the whole, let's say, from a global perspective. And so we decided to, from the very beginning, really to have a comprehensive approach. So when you look at smart village, it's, let's say, really smart communities. How can we make sure that any communities, every communities anywhere on the globe, let's say in this case in Niger, how can we make sure that every community will have access to services? And we know that one important thing in accessing services, or even in trying to transform communities, are financial payment anyway, are financial platforms, because there need to be some transaction somehow. Community A needs to transact with community B or with other communities to be able to elevate itself. So we having that in mind, we had an approach where we focus on the citizen. So it's really a citizen-centered focus, and by default, women-centric focus as well, and service-centric focus approach, sorry. Leveraging technology, that is. The example of Niger is quite interesting, because that's the only country on the continent, maybe on the planet even, where the main city, the capital city, is not that populated. It's only 6% of the population that lives in Niamey, the capital city. The rest of the population lives in rural areas. And to make it even more interesting, you have an extremely very low density of population. So obviously you cannot have the standard approach in trying to address, let's say, the women challenges, and by default, the community challenges. So having that in mind, we came up with this idea. So how can we leverage technology and from day one, connect all those communities? So that's number one. Number two, we realized that in order to make all this sustainable and to really make sure that there is also a true adoption from the beneficiaries, it is important from the very beginning, to address their own challenges, and then to add on top of that some of, let's say, the value-added services, I will call them, that will make it more appealing to them. We started by running a few pilots to gather and collect enough information. And the approach has been from day one to have these beneficiaries being part of the discussions, part of, let's say, the crafting of the solution. We also, from the very beginning, focus on bringing the main stakeholders who actually are present in the villages or who are running various programs to support women, to support the youth, to support the rural communities. By bringing them on board, we're able to identify together, the key areas. I mean, it's the usual suspects: health, education, having agriculture, and let's say climate also. So these are a few of the challenges, and then energy, electricity, because in the rural areas, unfortunately, people live in the dark. And so we did that. We bring to the main stakeholders were on the government side, so those of the main ministerial departments that focus on those issues. On the international community side, we have the development banks, We have the bilateral cooperation agencies. We had NGOs. We have also the civil society, important to bring them on board, and the youth organizations. Niger, like many African countries, having an extremely young population. In Niger, for example, median age is 15, and 2/3 of the population is under 25 years old. So we wanted to bring the youth on board from two perspectives, those living in the villages, of course, but also the talent that we have on the continent, and in Niger in particular, that are working on all those, let's say, digital environment, developing platform, developing local content, developing many tools that could be used in this program that we're launching. That led us to come up with a blueprint, which actually we even published with the International Telecommunication Union. So you can find it on the ITU website. If you type blueprint on Smart Village, you'll find it, and it's in different languages: French, English, Arabic, Chinese, you name it, all the UN languages. So we had that blueprint that we started then implementing. It's a guide really that give a perspective, and then also give, I was going to say, one of the formulas in addressing some of those challenges and connecting communities in such a way that it makes sense, in such a way that it can be maintained, that in such a way that it can benefit the most to the local population. So then that led us to launching this program, where basically we are aiming at connecting close to 3,000 villages within 36 months. We had already started. We connected already about 400 villages, and interesting. In that approach, so connecting the villages, let's say, is more or less the end of the tail. But at the central level, we set up also groups, clusters that focus on those areas. So we have, for example, a cluster that focuses on education, a cluster that focuses on agriculture, another one that focuses on health, on energy. And one important cluster is the one with the fintech. So in that cluster, so you have that the startups actually that work on all the fintech environment. We also have the central bank that is involved in that, the Minister of Finance, to make sure that from all angles, whether it's the policies or technology, that we have the main stakeholders on board and working with us in sandboxing even some of those questions that we were deploying. And we also have a coding academy, again, with those startups that we brought on board to be able to work with us in making sure that the solution that we're going to deploy are adapted to our environment. You know that in Niger, like in many developing countries, you have a very high illiteracy. You also have a lack of devices because of the cost that are involved and things like that. So we wanted to have solutions that are really adapted. And then we also deploy digital community centers. These are either villas that we rent, and then we make sure that there is a space available, or containers that are repurposed as training centers. In each case, what we do, we equip those centers with laptops, on average 20 laptops per center. We also equip them with smartphones. They're all powered by green energy, solar panels. And then we have local servers where we store all information really that the community could benefit from. And by doing that also, that really make the user experience much better, because at local level, then you have a better connection. You don't have to rely on the mobile networks or things like that, not only from the cost perspective, but also from really the user experience quality perspective. So we put all this in place, and then we run some programs to train people. It's one thing to come and deploy the technology, and it's another thing to make sure that the beneficiary take full advantage of that. So there are training camps that we organize. So those digital centers, we deploy about 100 of them. We're going to deploy up to 150. And there are activities on a daily basis. Different groups actually are invited. When we focus on women in particular, we focus a lot on our financial education, because it's important. Most of them actually are in some trading activities, one way or the other. So we wanted to make sure that they understand really, let's say, the basics of finance or of accounting, so that they can better use, let's say, their own resources. That's one. And then we also focus on financial inclusion per se. We set them up with mobile money accounts, and we to make it even more appealing and to them, because as you know it, they have little resources. So you need to have a platform that is friendly enough, and also that is really cost efficient. Someone who spend, I don't know, maybe $1 or $2 a day, you cannot offer her a service where the cost will be even 50 cents. It just doesn't make sense. So what we have decided to do is to make those platforms really extremely, I was going to say cheap is not the right word, but affordable, and making sure that also they have access at a discounted rate to various services and goods as well. Most women in rural areas will use their resources to buy maybe some stock. It can be oil, it can be just some insurance also for the businesses and things like that. So we make sure that we brought the private sector to work with us in offering top quality products, but at a discounted rate, to make it even more attractive for the community. So the training program that we launch, it's a one-year training program, is aiming at training 65,000 people. And among them, so far, we had close to 80% that are women. And also in our approach to avoid, let's say, to make maybe our approach even more beneficial for the community, we also invite men, or let's say young men, to all these programs. Usually even it's the spouses who bring their husband to be part of that. And we find it very interesting because you'll be surprised, but women are, I think, more attracted to all this digital world, and they're more curious, and then they quickly really identify, the benefit that they can gain from all those initiatives that are being put at their disposal. And once they're convinced, they are able to bring their husbands on board, because the husbands also are in some trading activities. So in Niger, so far, really, it has been amazing as an experience. Other countries, I think, are following suit, because what we have done also is to share our experience and to share that. That's why we decided to have the blueprint with ITU, to make sure that the whole world has access to it. And then also with one of our partners, Smart Africa, we're a member of Smart Africa Alliance. We made also the Smart Village experience and available, to the whole continent. Maybe I'll stop here for now, and then if there are comments or questions, and then I'll be happy to address those. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ibrahima, for your insightful intervention. I'm liking what I'm hearing, and especially, even in the composition of this panel, having you be a he for she advocate to the cause of gender inclusivity, intentionality in implementing in IIPS in Africa is definitely something to encourage. Having the husbands, the men be a part of the discussions, the trainings is definitely something to encourage, to change mindsets as we speak of women and as we speak of gender in general. And also another point that I took from here is the sandbox experience that you mentioned earlier, where you use technology to adapt, and an approach of carpool for development, where you bring different stakeholders, whether it be civil society organizations, private sector organization, government organizations, to come up with the solutions that are catered specifically to women. So the experience of Nigeria is really one is a different experience, but is one to be heard, and we look forward to reading this report that was done with the ITU, and to learn more about it, and seeing how Nigeria's experience can be used in other countries in Africa as we speak of financial inclusion of women in the IIPS ecosystem. So thank you so much. And I just in terms of there are a few questions that came through the chat, and so I will start with the first one, which is a question for you, Ibrahima. And it asks is what measures or guidelines should be put in place to protect women's privacy and security while utilizing their data, or to tailor payment solutions that genuinely empower and include them. I just want to add, Ibrahima, since we just have a few minutes left, 10 minutes, as you answer this question, if you could also conclude with any call to action that you may have as it relates to gender intentionality in implementing IIPS. And same to Jacqueline, if you thereafter can provide any type of call to action as it relates to the topic of this session. Thank you, Ibrahima.
Thank you very much. I think these are really interesting and a question and valid questions. I mean, what we really need to do when it comes to privacy and security is to apply, the same high standard that will apply to anything. This is absolutely very sensitive. So what we've been doing in Niger, that's why from the very beginning, really, it's a stakeholders approach. We made sure that women and women organizations are involved from the very beginning. We make sure that also we train, because one thing that people need to understand, it's not the technology only, but also users have to be made aware of the privacy and then security, how they can, the measure they can take to protect themselves. So that's why we have those trainings taking place. So we make sure that the women on their end are trained. They understand that they need to keep their password to them, even though they're not literate. They shouldn't ask someone, to access, give him or her their passcode, to access any type of services. That's one. In terms of also the data, really, we make sure that, like in Niger, it's the national agency that is custodians of the data, as well as the statistic. There is an organization that is in charge of, managing all the data. And we even have, it's one of the records with having a data protection agency, which we work with, IIPS, and to make sure that really all the measures are take place or enforced, to make sure that data are collected and that also users, and in this case women, are aware and informed on maybe the risk that they could be exposed to. So that's really what we do for now. And again, we insist is training, and then making sure that at also collecting side, all the tools are in place to make sure that the data are safely secured and protected as well. And as to my call of action, it's really maybe twofold. One, the approach has to be comprehensive. We shouldn't focus on the technology. We need to focus on what we're trying to do. And when we talk about financial inclusion and all this, is really to make sure that women are empowered, that women have access to services. We shouldn't forget that. We tend to focus too much on policies, on the technology, but we forget the beneficiaries. So they need to be part of the discussions, and they need to be invited to help craft the solutions. And they shouldn't be any sort of discrimination. I think we need to bring more women from the rural areas, because they are the one who are the most vulnerable. They're the one who can benefit the most from the technology. So that will really be my call for action, to make sure that we don't lose focus, and that we're humble enough to listen to this very brilliant and creative women. You'll be amazed as to how creative they could be if you give them the tools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibrahima. I think we still have a few minutes and we have time for one more question. There's a question that came through from one of our attendees. And again, it's for you, Ibrahima. So we're going to utilize fully your time here. So the question goes, and it says, were there trainings on the mobile money accounts for the women, or were the levels of digital financial capability already high enough? So if you want me to repeat, I guess it goes to your question of training when you speak of training women. So the question was, were those trainings on the mobile money accounts for the women, or were the levels of digital financial capability already high enough when we speak of women and mobile money?
No, I think it depends on how you look at it. I mean, I was going to say it wasn't high enough at the beginning, because when you take Niger, for example, we didn't have a low penetration. And again, I mentioned also very low literacy rates. So I'm not going to say that we're starting from scratch, but sort of. And that was maybe even the beauty of this exercise, is that we have started maybe with the most difficult part, where you don't have connectivity, you don't have also enough awareness, and then you don't have even the platform, the capabilities in place. And so that was challenging at the beginning, but actually it's helped us really bring people on board much faster. One thing that I mentioned was that we were getting all the stakeholders involved from the very beginning. So we kind of co-create and co-build, the whole approach. And after that, it's become more or less like on accelerating mode, where that's why we're able within a year to train close to 65,000 people. We were able to deploy more than 100 digital centers to equip them, and then to have training taking place every day. And we focus on those that I mentioned, financial literacy, and then financial education, digital or financial literacy, and then also inclusion, and then also digital inclusion. But on top of that, depending on the centers and the region, there are all the training that the population have requested. We even have health care, what's called nurses, or others who are also benefiting from those training. Yeah, so it wasn't high enough, I was going to say at the beginning, but it gained tractions, and then been able to get even more visibility to that. And we have seen since new stakeholders actually joining, new partners, more NGOs, for example, more development partners, and even private, what is important, even the private sector now is interested in doing that. All those training centers that we have deployed are becoming really multi-service centers. And we're training even people, let's say, who happen just to be in a given community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very insightful how you guys are using training to reach the masses and, train people on digital financial services and finding that intersection in financial services, but also other sectors such as health, agriculture. Definitely something to encourage and, get that mindset of thinking outside the box and not only focusing on cities, but also rural areas. I want to give this opportunity to Jacqueline, just as concluding remarks, same as Ibrahima, if you have any final remarks as it relates to a call to action on the topic at hand, gender intentionality in implementing IIPS in Africa.
Thank you. For me, the first one is, just appreciating the gender gap that exists from an accessibility point of view. And the call to action, therefore, to stakeholders is to further drive efforts to reach more excluded women, especially in low-income segments, those in rural areas, the least educated, those without digital connectivity, and with limited or no access to a mobile phone. This calls for, public and private sector collaboration, calls for data sharing and, conducting research that is sex desegregated to establish the nuances in the way, in what would actually promote that access for women. Again, on the side of usage, what we are seeing emerge is the differences in the way men and women interact with digital financial services in Africa. It would be useful for stakeholders to further determine the variation in the financial inclusion indicators. We have 3 indicators, that is access to financial services, we have usage, and the quality of the products and services delivered. Because again, if when it comes to usage, there's that difference. So it would be helpful if we can further understand what works for women and design structures to support that access and usage. In terms of the intentionality at the payment scheme level, it's important to also have this view, because again, even from the early research, we appreciate that we appreciate the highlight of the level 1 principles in the way they can be useful in driving the adoption of digital financial services for women. But we also need to further investigate at the payment system level. How can the scheme rules, for example, be intentional towards the participant, making specific considerations for women? So I think at all levels, including the scheme level, this is important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline, and happy that you're bringing it to the payment infrastructure scheme level, which is the intention of this session. So we're wrapping up. It is 9:30 on the dot, Dakar Universal Time. Thank you, both Ibrahima and Jacqueline, for participating in this panel. I think it was an insightful and engaging panel, a lot of interest, and we look forward to continuing research on this topic with our upcoming report that will be coming hopefully out earlier next year. And I encourage everyone to go to www.africanenda.org to learn more about inclusive and instant payment systems in Africa. And also there's a resource center as it relates to our flagship report, The State of Inclusive and Instant Payment Systems in Africa, which the second report will be launched next month in November in Addis Ababa at the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa, and it was reduced with ECA as well as the World Bank. Thank you all. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, Ibrahima. Again, my name is Jenna Bakan. I'm the Advocacy and Partnership Lead at African Nenda, and thank you for taking the time to listen in and to ask your questions, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and contribution to the financial inclusion agenda in Africa. Thank you.